Within the Egyptian zodiac of Dendera, the constellation Orion was given the name Hagat, which means "this is he who triumphs." The hieroglyphic characters underneath the sign of Orion read Or, which is the very word meaning light. The name Orion is derived from the word Orion, which means coming forth as light. Is it mere coincidence that Jesus continually associated himself with this figure of Orion, which we have represented within the heavens? Surely the wonderful and glorious things which we see clearly before us have not been hidden under a bushel, but rather they have been set up high upon their own lampstand, shedding their light over the entire face of the world. According to the prophecies within the stars, Orion is that mighty triumphant warrior who is to come forth from the heavens. In some parts of the world he is equated to be the sun god and called by the name Dumuzi, which is a Chaldean or Assyrian name meaning the son of light. The Hindu identified him as the storm god, and in Phoenician he was the sun god. Within the Egyptian Book of the Dead, it was taught that the soul of Osiris was to be found within this constellation. And in Egypt he was also called Sahu, who also was said to be the very soul of Horus. It is said that Orion had been given one of the great miraculous powers that no other man could duplicate. This one sign was given to him to help distinguish and identify him from any human impostor, such as Nimrod, for example, who might attempt to proclaim himself as being that Orion who had come in the flesh. Orion had been given this special power by Poseidon himself, and that special gift was the ability to walk upon the water as if it were ground beneath his feet. It is interesting how Orion is often represented as if being able to walk upon the water of the river Eridanus, which is set immediately before his feet, and is also a deacon constellation. It was this sign that would identify him as being the true Orion, and we need only to examine him by the prophecies that precede him. Now it is strange that these prophecies do not originate from the Old Testament. We do not find any prophet walking upon the waters, but rather do we find their origin within the constellations. By walking upon the water, we must admit that Jesus was indeed, whether consciously and deliberately, or whether merely accidentally proclaiming himself to be that very Messiah who is to be associated with this constellation of whom the ancients have named Orion. By doing this, then, we suggest that Jesus was actually declaring to the Gentiles without even speaking a word that this is he who triumphs, this is the light of heaven, this is the roaring conqueror coming swiftly to destroy and to crush the enemy under his feet, which is the meaning of the stars within the constellation of Orion. Did Jesus not know of the ancient Gentile prophecies and so mistakenly showed the world that he himself was the Orion who the Gentiles taught would one day come forth to reclaim the throne? Could it be a mere coincidence or happenstance? The birth of Orion was to be the result of some miraculous intervention of the gods, and Orion was born to depose the current king from his throne. As we follow the myths through to the end, we discover that one particular king had simply refused to resign his throne, and even at the close of his predetermined term. Now, to prove himself fit to be accepted as the new king and to be awarded the daughter of the king to be his wife, Orion would be required to successfully complete all the tasks that would be assigned to him. It is said that Orion loved the 7 daughters known as the Pleiades who ride upon the back of Taurus. The greatest task of all would include the defeat of every beast that threatened the lives of the inhabitants of the earth. He must take dominion over all creatures that move upon the face of the earth. Now this is the very task that the biblical Adam, being identified himself as the first Adam, had failed to accomplish. The second Adam, however, who is called Orion, the promised Messiah, does succeed in taking back and reclaiming his dominion over the entire earth, as well as over every living creature upon the earth. That was the dominion that Adam had lost and Jesus had regained. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 28, This was said concerning Adam. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, Be fruitful and multiply, replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. It had been prophesied and commonly taught that every creature was to be easily subdued by Orion except for one gigantic scorpion, who was said to have come forth from underneath the earth. This scorpion would prophetically cause the death of Orion. In reality, he causes the death of not only the first Adam, but the second one, Jesus, as well. We will, of course, consider the meaning of Scorpio. For now, however, let us simply be content with the meal which we have on our plates before us, for we shall surely get to the rest of these great jewels as we progress. In one version of the myth, Orion must have had both of his eyes put out. This is yet another prophetic sign to prove him when he arrives that he himself is the one promised to come. What might the blindness mean or represent? For we cannot say that Jesus himself was blind, can we? Within the Old Testament, we have a story of Samson, whose life, like that of Orion, represented a prophecy or type of Christ. Interesting that Samson was the mightiest man who lived upon the earth and was also marked with a lion's pelt, as both the counterparts Orion and Hercules were. Samson killed the mighty lion, and some believe that afterwards he might very well have worn its pelt, which is clearly told us within the Gentile myths. However, it never says really in the scriptures that Samson wore this pelt. The symbol of wearing the pelt merely demonstrates how the strength of the mighty enemy had now been added to his own strength. But the blindness of Samson and his triumph from the pit is most certainly a type of prophecy of Christ. For in their death, both Samson and the Messiah would accomplish much more in their lives. The blindness in the eyes of Samson was merely a picture of the death of the Messiah. And it was a prophecy showing that the great mighty Messiah who was to come must be put to death, so that through death he might gain access into the very heart of the enemy's domain. Afterward, he would cast down the pillars, thereby delivering his people from the satanic bondage. According to the prophecy of Orion, his eyes were to be healed. If Orion's blindness represents the death of the Messiah, what then might the healing of his eyes represent? It represents the resurrection from the dead. In the myths of Egypt, Horus had suffered the sting of the scorpion and died. Through the intercession of Isis, the power of Ra raised Horus from the dead, and it is interesting. Within the Greek myths, it is Artemis who pleads with Asclepius to raise Orion from the dead. However, in this account, for some reason, Zeus struck down Asclepius with a thunderbolt before he was able to comply with her request. But once again, we will consider this later when we examine the sign of Scorpio in the life of Asclepius. Another star within the constellation showing that Messiah is to be wounded is Siph, which is the star in the right leg, which means bruised, being the very word used in Scripture in Genesis 3:15 to speak of the bruising of the Messiah. Another star within this constellation is Almatic, which is located right in the belt, which means the wounded one. We see the Messiah must be wounded to fulfill the prophecies concerning him. It is difficult in considering all this to find any valid reason for the Jews to have misunderstood these prophecies. It appears that even the Gentiles knew the Messiah must first be wounded for the sake of the rest of the world, before he might triumph over his enemy. And this is clearly seen in Isaiah chapter 53, verse 5. Yet another star within the constellation is Mintaka, which is located in the belt of Orion, and which means the dividing as a sacrifice. Other stars within the constellation indicate that Orion himself, the Messiah, is to triumph in the end. One of these stars is named Al-Rai, which means who bruises or breaks. Another star is Thabit, which means treading on, as if in defeat. In both cases, the names refer to the defeating of the great enemy who wages war against this Messiah. In addition, there are many other stars within the constellation Orion that indicate he is a mighty and strong prince who is promised to come forth. For instance, the stars Al-Gibor and Nifla, both translated the mighty. The star Nux is translated the strong, and the star Al-Nagjad is translated the prince who is prophesied to come forth. Heka is a star translated as coming, or the coming one, and Masa is the one coming forth, as the branch, or the star El Giauza, which is translated the branch. He's coming forth not only to defeat the enemy, but to rule over the entire earth. Another star, El Murzum, which means the ruler. Each of these stars tells us in a voice and language of their own, which every man in every place might easily hear and recognize as an own tongue.